All right, hi everyone. This is Jerry from Jerry's Room. I'd like to talk to you guys today about something pretty simple. Going to be talking about exporting audio from an Ableton live session. This is intended mainly for my clients that I have that are working or recording with Ableton or making songs with Ableton. And it's also probably pretty good for anybody who is an artist working with Ableton or who deals with these artists that work with it. Um, I sometimes get sent Ableton sessions. I just sometimes ask for it even whenever it's recorded in Ableton. Just say send me the entire session. And then I export it myself from Ableton in order to mix it in my preferred mixing DAW, which is Pro Tools. If you're somebody that mixes in Ableton or makes songs in Ableton and you want to print everything, get a mix engineer says, just send me the raw tracks and perhaps the MIDI. How do you export audio and MIDI from Ableton? Easily, correctly, and making sure everything syncs up whenever you just send the raw audio to a mix engineer. And also for mix engineers that want to do this for themselves. Let's take a look. I've got this little song set up here. This is a pretty simple song. It's mainly electronic, a lot of drum samples, but it's also got some other interesting stuff in there, like some recorded guitar, and also some differences between mono and stereo, which is pretty important for what we're going to be looking at today as well. So let's just play a short bit for you there. Alrighty, so let's take a quick look at what we've got here. We've got a kick sample. We've got a whole drum track which has a bunch of hi-hats and some other sounds on there, which I did on purpose for this one. We've got a pop kit. It's got a whole bunch of samples in there, and we've got a bunch of synths, a bass synth, and a guitar loop that was just an acoustic guitar recorded pretty badly. So don't judge me on that one. This was an old assignment of mine. So how do you start with, if you have a track like this, how do you start exporting? First of all, the easy shortcut for the export window is Shift-Command-R. Fortunately, Ableton has this nice little export window that you can use here. In this little window, you can select specific tracks. You can select all tracks, which will just go through every single track and export it one by one for you. And you can also just print your master, which is probably the one that most people have already used, which just prints your master bus, which is basically your mix. Now, there's a couple of things that we need to pay attention to. First off, before we even start exporting anything, say you want to export all of the tracks in your session, all at once or one by one, doesn't matter. Make sure you make a selection first. You make a selection, basically make a look what's the very final sound of your track, and then make some extra space after that, for reverb tails, delay tails, whatever. Select there and drag on any track, doesn't matter which track. You could do it on this one, could do it on this one. Drag from way beyond the end of your song all the way to the very first bar, if this is where your song starts. Of course, if your song starts in the middle, then you just drag it to wherever your first note is. But make sure you leave the selection the way it is and don't touch it anymore for the rest of what we're about to do. So in this case, I'm just going to drag it to second 0. Then I'm going to open my window up again, and you'll see that this selection that I've made will be represented here. Now, this is very important because if you're exporting raw audio, raw MIDI, you need to be able to put all of that just imported into a session, and everything needs to sync up. If the tracks start at different times, or they're not the same length, they will not sync up. And your mixing engineer will just basically email back to you and say, "There's something that sounds off in your song." Hopefully, he'll notice that there's something wrong in your song, and he won't just start mixing it for you, send it back, send you the bill, and then you'll notice that your hi hats were off the entire time. So make sure you make the selection and don't change it for the duration of exporting everything that we're about to do. Then you need to know which tracks are stereo and which ones are mono. Ableton has the somewhat annoying habit of basically giving you a stereo meter for everything, turning everything into stereo, even if you just recorded it with one microphone, which should basically be a mono input. It gives you a stereo meter, and often I've also noticed when you go to the export audio window, it'll just leave convert to mono off, and it'll also sometimes put normalize on by default. First thing I would do is switch normalize off. This changes the volume or limits the volume of your track, changes the volume of it. You don't want to do that. Even if you have clipped audio or something like that. If you have clipped audio, you recorded it too loud, and you need to record it again at a quieter volume, or hope that your mix engineer will do his best to remove any clicks or pops. Normalize won't do anything for you that your mix engineer can do better. Convert to mono is a different one. You really need to go track by track on this one. For example, my kick here, if we take a look at this kick, solo it up, it's not a very special stereo kick or anything like that. There's no difference between left and right in the field. Sorry about that little crackle there. You can see the meters are just bouncing up and down the way you'd expect them in the mono signal. You can print this track as a mono, definitely. If we were to look at this little track right here, clear differences between left and right, which we would want to maintain. If we wanted to print all of this as one track, you definitely want to print it as a stereo, or you're going to have some strange summing to mono. It's not going to sound the way you expected it to. We'll talk about splitting up your drums later as well, which in some cases might be better than printing everything as a stereo track for your mix engineer. Then there might also be synths like this. Differences right there. There's basically in the sampler, which is battery that I was using here, there's already some differences, some panning going on. In case you want to preserve that, you need to print it as a stereo. If you want to keep your panning, print it as a stereo. Of course, be mindful of the fact that some sounds will just be panned like this, for example. This little mono acoustic guitar is panned to the left. And in fact, it's also pan automated. It's changing. Now, this is something I want to print mono. Why? Because the original sound is mono, and the mix engineer can probably do this panning even better than you are doing right now, because he will change the stereo image, or he will fine-tune the stereo image, and he will do any panning automation you ask him to do. Just give him a chance. If you print this as a stereo file with this panning automation on it, he will have less control. He will not be able to change that panning automation. It's there, it's printed, it's unchangeable. So in this case, you could either print it as a stereo and delete automation. We'll talk about automation later as well. Or you could just print this track as mono. So how would I go about that? If I wanted to print something as mono, I make sure convert to mono is on. Convert to mono means change to mono. So I would do this for this kick, I would do this for this guitar, and I would just export them like this. Make sure you take a good look at this. Your sample rate ideally would just be the same as what you recorded it at or what your session is at. Bit depth, ideally 24 or 32. 16 is a little low. Might be that you left your session at 16. Might want to think about switching up to 24 and recording at 24 bit depth minimum all the time. 24 bit depth, why? Because it gives you 0 to 144 dB of dynamic range, whereas 16-bit, which is a CD, will only give you 96. So 24 will give you a bigger dynamic range, and it will also be a slightly heavier file, of course, but it will also be better for your mixing engineer to work with. And then everything else in this window is pretty self-explanatory. Dither options are only important if you are changing sample rates, but I would leave it at triangular just to be on the safe side. I've never had any problems just leaving it on triangular. Analysis file is only if you want to keep warp information and stuff like that, I believe. Alrighty, so let's take another look at something else. You might want to take a look at some of the levels going up and down throughout the tracks. Let me just unsolo this real quick. You'll see that this is already a pretty hot track. Some of these levels are already a little bit too high. If they're higher than this, you might want to consider just bringing down your faders or putting your faders to unity or even lower, unity being 0, when you're printing, because you might want to give a little bit of headroom to your tracks so that the mix engineer can also incorporate that headroom, play around with it a little bit. Sending really, really hot square-waved tracks to your mixing engineer might not be the best idea. So we were talking about automation before this as well. Try to remove automations such as pan and volume. As you can see, I've got a fade out here. Of course, this is my mix, so yeah, that volume automation makes sense. Printing this track separately with that automation, however, will just make it harder for the mix engineer to determine which compression to use, and will give him less control over the volume of the track, because it'll go up and down without him doing anything. So try to remove that. The easiest way to do that would be to delete your automation. Now, if you're nervous about destroying your original mix, first of all, make sure you save live set as. And for example, the song is named star star stars. You could name it star star stars for export. And you save it as a different project file. This way, if I did it like that, I could just go around deleting automation like that. It'll be gone. You can always Command Z to bring it back, but just on the safe side, delete it before you export it, and save it as a different star star stars export, whatever. So you don't lose your original mix. Also, a good idea to send your original mix to the mastering or mixing engineer. So if you want to print, your master first, make sure that's not converted to mono. You can send that to your mix engineer before you start exporting your tracks. That way, he knows what you were trying to do, and he will sort of use the same idea for his mix of your song. But when you're printing these separate tracks, delete these automations so that you can then safely export these at the volume that they are at a unity volume, and then leave everything like that up to the mix engineer. Same with panning automation on stereo tracks. You might have really intended for a part of that sound to be on the left. If that's so, your mix engineer will hear this in your reference mix, or you can just remind him of it in an easy email. But please give him a normal centered mono or stereo track that he can work with, right? Other things that might be important. I have this reverb and this delay set up here on these buses. That's fine. I can even print those, as you can see when you do Shift Command R. I can even print those separately, just the pure wet signals. In case I want to, in case it's like an effect that I really want the mix engineer to use or to use as a reference. But there are also some reverbs going on, and some EQs and compression going on some of these tracks. Now, sometimes this is a little bit of a gray area. Sometimes you can say I really shaped this sound exactly the way it is, and I want it to stay that way, and just have the mix engineer not change that. So you could, for example, leave this EQ on. But this reverb, for example, if you print it with a reverb on it, it'll make it much harder for the mixing engineer to EQ, because he'll be EQing your dry signal and your reverb signal at the same time. Just switching this off when you print it will fix that little problem there. I've also got a little microshift going on here. In this case, I might leave this on because it's part of the sound that I made. Or I might print him one with, one without, and leave the decision up to the mixer what he wants to do with it. So I'm going to pause here for a sec. take a look at part 2 for how to deal with exporting MIDI from Ableton and how to split up your drum tracks into separate audio channels, also useful when sending it to a mixer. So visit jerrysroom.com or subscribe to this channel, and you should be able to find part 2 linked underneath in the description. Thanks a lot, guys, and see you guys later.